Did the Giants' 2-5 road trip through Colorado and Los Angeles position them as deadline sellers this Tuesday? 4 critical games against the Rockies remain before the deadline, and it may determine everything.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and RotoGraphs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for over 5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job, and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. And coming up on today's show, Giants end up losing 3 out of 4 to the Dodgers. They had a chance to split that series. If they had split that series, it would have made a huge difference, really. And if they had won an extra game in Colorado, it would have made a huge difference, really. And so game of inches, game of kind of small margins where one game here, one game there, it can really flip things in a significant way, especially this time of year. And so with the loss, instead of being 50-54 coming into a 4-game series that's over the course of 3 days, a scheduled doubleheader on Saturday, Giants, with it, they would have had a chance with a 4-game sweep to potentially be at 500 at the All-Star break. But now at the trade deadline. But now they've guaranteed themselves a losing record as they go into the trade deadline. The Giants are off on Monday, and the trade deadline is on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific. And so the best case scenario for them is 53-55, and that would be with a 4-game sweep. And it might take that to position themselves as not sellers, essentially. Here's the thing. This front office has pretty much yet to be significantly aggressive at the trade deadline. I would say 2021 when they got Chris Bryant, that's a little bit of an exception there. But even then, it's like they knew he wasn't that good. He was just a big name, and he was okay for the Giants, and it's been a disaster since he signed with the Rockies. But, big name, a lot of excitement at the time. And Farhan Zaidi said he wanted to reward that team. It was like, here's your reward for your play. And as opposed to we want to do everything we can to make sure we win in the playoffs, because they were clearly going at that point. And then in 2019, they pretty aggressively sold off a lot of pieces, but they didn't sell off their most desirable assets in Madison Bumgarner and Will Smith, the closer, in part because they were somewhat in contention, almost like in a better spot than they are now, which is telling and a big problem. And it was Bruce Bochy's quote-unquote last year. If you're not watching on YouTube, I'm doing air quotes there. It was Bruce Bochy's last year, and they wanted to give him a shot and if you trade Bumgarner and Will Smith, you're not going to have much of a shot in that season. But they did trade a bunch of relievers and got some guys who are currently coming up, Kai Tang and Jalen Davis. I forget who else, but anyway. Tristan Beck and the Mark Melancon trade, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, they've been pretty passive at trade deadlines ever since. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you I expect a ton of activity, but at the same time, if the Giants were to get swept in this series, there's only 5 possible records that they'll have at the trade deadline. If the Giants get swept, they would be 59 49 and 59, 10 games under 500. If they go 1-3, they'd be 8 games under 500. If they go 2-2, 6 games under 500. And even if they go 3-1 in this 4-game series, they'll still be 4 games under 500 with, again, that off day on Monday followed by 2 games at home against the A's. So if you're 4 games under 500 and you've got 2 against the A's upcoming, I can see how you might be able to justify, especially with the pitching that they have coming back. Robbie Ray making every turn, through that rotation. Alex Cobb coming back. Hayden Birdsong, which, by the way, he was optioned, and we said we would talk about it. It was kind of a clever little thing that they did. They optioned him, but because of the doubleheader, they get an extra player on Saturday, and it's going to be Hayden Birdsong, and he's just going to make that start. And then that option window, because you have to be down for a certain number of days, keeps like that extra player. Bringing up Hayden Birdsong doesn't count against like resetting that time period from when he was optioned until when he's free to be called back up. And so he could definitely be called back up in short order, basically in time for his next start or thereabouts, maybe like one start missed. But the rotation might also be full, or it might not, because they might be sellers. And if they're sellers, who's going to go? And so that's a question we're going to dive into in far more detail a little bit later on. Like, what assets do the Giants have to trade? It would be a very disappointing outcome for this team. I have been saying this a lot over the last few days, but this team has underachieved. There's just no doubt about it. Like in previous years, I've kind of said it's not Gabe Kapler's fault. It's a roster construction fault issue. And this season, I would say it's less about the roster construction and more about performance. And just, this is a team that projection systems had as comfortably above 500, kind of in the 84 to 88-ish win range. And right now, FanGraphs has them projected to finish with 79.7 wins. So that would be roughly 80 and 82. Right now, FanGraphs has their playoff odds at just 11%. And that's why, as I'm going to discuss later, this 4 games, I think they're in wait and see mode. I think that, if you do go out there and sweep this 4-game series and you're 53 and 55, staring at 2 games at home against the A's coming up, where you could conceivably win both of those as well. The A's and Rockies have a combined road record of 30 and 72, which comes out to 1.76 wins per 6 games. So less than 2 wins. So that's like, 4-2, but better is what you could kind of expect just based on the average road record of these 2 teams. And so for the Giants, I think 5-1, but the trade deadline comes before the A's. And so what do you do in this series against Colorado? I really feel like they've got to go 3-1 at the very minimum. And if you can sweep, then that would go a long way towards potentially making them not sellers. But I think some people think they should be sellers because they do have some attractive pieces that they could trade. And they have had some positive developments on like the young player side of things this season. And so there's like hope for the future with some of the young players like Elliot Ramos and Tyler Fitzgerald and Patrick Bailey and Kyle Harrison and others. And you could potentially add to that with some maybe even high profile prospects with some of the players that the Giants could conceivably trade. So we'll get into who they might trade if they're sellers, which is a distinct possibility at this point. Deadline on Tuesday. We'll get into it in just a minute. And before we do, this episode of Locked on Giants is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rivals' cities with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city. I absolutely love traveling to watch the Giants on the road, even in a season like this. I mean, I saw them get swept in LA, their rival city. And, from hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, I did stay in a hotel that looked over Fenway Park earlier this season. Booking.com has so many choices across the United States for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, on the site, or in the Booking.com app. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have ended in other sports, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and make the most of your summer. I'm on FanDuel.com right now, and I'm just going to check out the odds for the Giants tonight. They're going to be favorites. It's been a while. I guess they were favorites in Colorado, but in LA they were not. Pretty significant favorites here with the money line at minus 172 for the San Francisco Giants. And Kyle Harrison on the mound for the Giants, Kyle Freeland, lefty, on the mound for the Rockies. So lots to check out with baseball. So many games. Head over to FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, here we go. We're going to get into who do the Giants have to trade if they do, in fact, become deadline sellers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, everydayers. On Monday, we're going to be breaking down basically the rest of the course of the rest of the season may be determined based on how the next 4 games in 3 days go. And because they won't play again until after the trade deadline. And so once Sunday is done, that's it. Like, that's all the baseball the Giants have to evaluate before they have to make decisions on trades. There's no more August trades. Like, this is a hard deadline. It kind of snuck up on me a bit because the deadline has been August 1st, I want to say, for a couple years in a row. But this year it's July 30th. So it's 2 days earlier than it's been the last couple of years. And so it's Tuesday. And Giants only have 3 more days of baseball before the trade deadline. So we'll be breaking that, how they do and what it means, down on Monday. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A reminder that you can catch every pitch of the Giants' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM. Just download the SXM app and search the word Giants. So I do just want to also mention that this was a game in the finale where they could have won. They came back, tied it 4-4, and then Tyler Rogers allowed back-to-back home runs, the first against Nick Ahmed, recently released Giant, known for, not being a good hitter. It's a game-tying home run in the bottom, go-ahead run in the bottom of the 8th for the Dodgers, and then Shohei Ohtani followed it up. I think it was the next pitch with a home run of his own. It was the first time in his career, by the way, that Tyler Rogers has allowed 2 home runs in an outing. So let's not pretend like that happens all the time, because it doesn't. And anyway, very painful loss. And they also, I think, someone asked me in a mailbag to predict their record for a certain stretch of time. And I predicted they would lose 3 out of 4 in LA, but I also said they would win 2 out of 3 in Colorado. And so technically, like, 1 win off from what I was saying. And then I think I said win 3 out of 4 against the Rockies. But now I'm saying kind of you got to sweep because you didn't win that extra game by taking 2 out of 3 in Colorado, and you didn't win that extra game that you had a chance to win in the finale in LA. And so they just find themselves in this position. They're 5.5 games out of a playoff spot with not that with a ton of teams is what I mean to say in between them and a playoff spot. The Cubs and Giants are tied. Giants are a game behind the Reds. They're 4 games behind the Pirates, who are 2 games over 500. They're 4.5 games behind the D-backs, who are 3 over 500. They're 5 behind the Cardinals, and none of those teams are in a playoff spot. So you'd have to pass all of them and then get to the Padres, who are 5.5 games ahead of the Giants. Mets in that second position, 6 ahead of the Giants. Worth noting, the Braves have lost 5 straight and are now just 6.5 ahead of the Giants. So it's still conceivable that you could, I'd like to see what the playoff odds look like if some of those teams struggle in the next, this weekend and the Giants sweep. That's why I think they're not just going to start selling off now. They're going to see how this weekend goes. But if they do, let's say those teams do well and the Giants maybe split or do worse, who do they have to trade? Well, the number one player of interest, I think, is Blake Snell, because he is a frontline arm when he's right. In his last 3 starts, he's looked like a frontline arm. Also, conceivably, Robbie Ray, but both of these players do have a little bit of a wrinkle in that they can opt out after 2024. And so I do think, though, with especially Blake Snell, you could get a handsome return. I don't fully buy this idea that Carlos Rodon would have been hard to trade based on his opt-out, because it's all downside. Because if he gets hurt, then a team is quote unquote stuck with him for the next year. But we're talking 2 months. You could take care of the guy. Don't overuse him. And if worst case scenario, you get him on a 1-year deal the next year, it's not that bad of a situation. And so for Snell, if I'm a team that has the money to pay for him, I want him on my team next year. The fact that he missed 2 months with injuries and struggled while dealing with kind of injuries and a short spring training and all that, I'm kind of bullish on a 2025 Blake Snell. So anyway, Blake Snell, given that, the performance has not been good enough to so far justify opting out probably, but if he keeps up what he's been doing, he for sure could. But if you're a contender, then this is a guy who could headline your rotation, or you could pair with your existing ace, and is someone you would really want in a playoff rotation for sure. And it was something that got Giants fans, myself included, excited about the potential of this team making the playoffs and having Logan Webb and Blake Snell, kind of a 2-headed monster there, along with Robbie Ray, Alex Cobb, Kyle Harrison, and others. But it just hasn't played out that way. So in addition, one of the most logical players who could be dealt is Michael Conforto, because it's a pure rental situation. He's just a free agent at the end of the year. There's no options or opt-outs. There's no player options / opt-outs, and he's not under contract for more than 2024. And so, the Brewers are apparently seeking, I think, left-handed outfield help, given that Christian Yelich is injured and may require season-ending back surgery. Conforto seems like a possible fit there. And it would free up a spot in the outfield where the Giants could, give, Luis Matos, just give him a couple months to just really play every day and see what he can do, for example. So just looking through their roster, Robbie Ray is a possibility too. I think they'd like to hold on to him, given that he is under contract for 2 more years. But he can opt out after 2024. And if he pitches like he pitched in his debut with the Giants, he definitely could opt out. So just, again, looking through the roster, Logan Webb not getting traded. Matt Chapman, I don't think that is a situation where I think the team options and just the overall mediocre-ish, he's been above average, but he's not been great. And there's 2 player options there for 2025 and 2026. So I don't think Matt Chapman's going anywhere in a trade. Jorge Soler, I think, would be very tough to trade given his relatively poor performance this year. Apparently, Taylor Rogers, per reporting from Andrew Baggerly, I think it was, could be someone who gets dealt. And that makes sense to me. He's been quite effective. The Giants don't use him like a high leverage arm, but he's got an ERA in like the 2s, making $12 million this year and $12 million next year. This year is like 2/3 over. And so that would be like $4 million or so remaining on this year's salary. So it'd be like, only a $16 million commitment for this year and next year for a team that was acquiring him. And Alex Cobb is a pure free agent and rental. And so he's a guy, when he makes his season debut, which actually isn't supposed to come I don't think he's going to pitch before the trade deadline, but he's like ready to go basically right after that. He's a guy who could be dealt. And then Wilmer Flores was potentially a guy, but they just put him on the injured list. And apparently Mike Yastrzemski too. And that makes sense to me given that next year is his last year of team control, his last year of arbitration eligibility, and he's going to be 34 years old in less than a month. And so, it's not out of the question that Yastrzemski could be on the move. And again, it would be a move that opens up playing time if you're kind of punting on the season for younger players. And then in return, you're conceivably getting something of value because it's a reasonable price, $7.9 million. And again, like only a third of that roughly. So what would that, less than $3 million, like 2.5-ish for this year. And then you have the choice of if you want to bring him back next year via the arbitration process. And besides that, you could trade a reliever like Camilo Doval, but I just don't see them doing that. I think those are the most likely guys to go. I guess Tom Murphy, but he's injured, and I don't know when he's coming back. And he wasn't good, but he could be good. They signed him to be good, but he just hasn't been on the field nearly enough with that knee injury. So I think Snell and maybe Robbie Ray. Conforto is an obvious candidate. Taylor Rogers, maybe Wilmer Flores, depending on what the status is with that knee. And Mike Yastrzemski are like the obvious guys here. And Snell would probably get the biggest return. And it could be significant because that would be one of the best arms available on the market if the Giants decided to move him. And if they are in like a weak position, I hope they are more aggressive with selling because they haven't done that. And it's kind of left them in limbo year after year after year where they haven't had enough kind of impact young talent, even though they've had some come up. It just hasn't been enough. And that's what we're seeing this year, even though they're having impact talent from some young players like Bailey and Ramos, for example. And they have good veteran players like Logan Webb and Matt Chapman and Lamont Wade and, Jung-Hoo Lee was probably going to be pretty good, but is out for the season. But it just hasn't come together for them and resulted in enough wins to this point. And they're running out of time to make a case that they should be added to as opposed to subtracted from. So coming up in just a minute, we will preview this critical series, get into the pitching matchups and a prediction about what's going to happen and what the Giants will do at the deadline. We'll get into all of it in just a minute. And before we do, this episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by SupplyHouse. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trade, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. That's the best part. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM. And order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. All right, as promised, we are going to get into why this 4-game series is critical. I think some people, based on reactions I've seen on Twitter to some of my stuff that I've put out there and said, have already determined that the season is over. I'm not there yet, but I do think these 4 games could determine that. If you lose all 4, then they should sell rather aggressively, and I think they should trade Blake Snell, and they should. You're not going to get much for a lot of these guys. Like Michael Conforto, you're just not going to get much for a rental player not performing great on a relatively large salary. Giants may have to pay down some of that salary, or they just get out from underneath it and, the owners save some money and it opens up playing time for a young player. There's that angle that you could just look. The one thing that you should never, ever hope for is that they attach a prospect to a player in order to get more money taken away. That would be horrible. And I hope they don't do that. They haven't done that yet, and so I don't think they will. But anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Every day airs on Monday. Like I said, breaking down this 4-game series that starts tonight, scheduled doubleheader tomorrow. And I really feel like, they got to sweep, basically. 3 out of 4 at least. Otherwise, it's hard to make a case that they should add much. But also, this front office just hasn't been very aggressive, and so I wouldn't be shocked if they just kind of did nothing and were just kind of relatively quiet, as they've been for the most part under this leadership. And so that would be frustrating, I think, for fans, because once again, you're kind of like, where are you? Are you in or are you out? And I think you're just kind of in a holding pattern, but it's been too much of a holding pattern for too many years in terms of just results on the field and a lack of aggression with moves, although they have, to their credit, been aggressive with free agent signings. I mean, they pursued Ohtani, they pursued Yamamoto, they pursued Aaron Judge, like, to the best of their ability. And those players just didn't ultimately want to come here. And then they signed players to more money than any team but the Dodgers this offseason. It just hasn't resulted in a lot of impact. I'm looking at a picture of Jorge Soler right now, and what has he really done? And they gave him $43-ish million guaranteed, 3-year contract, and it's just not been a good year for him. And Matt Chapman has been solid but not great. Jung-Hoo Lee, they gave $17 million or something before the signing bonus, and then he's out for the year, so that impacts things for sure. But anyway, tonight it starts out with Kyle Harrison against Kyle Freeland. Rockies have just played terrible on the road. I pointed out on Twitter that the Giants have played poorly on the road, but the worst road team, I think, is the Rockies. And certainly by ERA, which I looked at as well, was road ERA. Then the Giants have a 4.91 road ERA, which is only the A's, White Sox, and Rockies are worse. So the Rockies have the worst road ERA, and it's almost 6. And so on average, the Rockies are allowing about 6 earned runs every game on the road. And so for the Giants, if you can average 6 runs a game in this 4-game series, I like their chances. So you just got to do it and do it with consistency, and it starts tonight. Kyle Freeland brings in his 5.63 ERA. Kyle Harrison, 3.86. So you should have the advantage there. And then in game 1 on Saturday, Blake Snell against Feltner, who's got the record really stands out for Ryan Feltner, 1-10, but an ERA of 5.19, and he pitched well against the Giants in Colorado just the other day. But it is Blake Snell against Ryan Feltner at home, so you should have the advantage there. And then in the second game, Austin Gomber, ERA is 4.70, which is actually not bad for a Rockies player. And it's going to be Hayden Birdsong for the Giants. You should have the advantage in every game of this series. And then on Sunday, game 2, Birdsong for the Giants, TBD for the Rockies, on Saturday. And then Sunday, it's Gomber for the Rockies, and it should be Jordan Hicks for the Giants in what Alex Pavlovich said would be likely Hicks's last start and before moving to the bullpen. So we'll see. I would, especially if they do decide to go in the selling direction, then moving Hicks to the bullpen just to rest his arm, give him a break, and let younger pitchers like Hayden Birdsong continue to pitch. I see the benefit there. Also, their rotation is full even without Jordan Hicks, pretty much, if everybody comes back. So we'll see. They could also trade Blake Snell and trade Alex Cobb, and then suddenly you've got spots to fill. And then they do have Hayden Birdsong, Carson Wisenhunt. So you could see a lot of young players. You could see Marco Luciano come back up. There's plenty of guys who could be dealt. And there are guys with value. Tyro Estrada, I didn't mention him, but his performance has kind of waned, but he still has value. And, do you want to open up a spot at second base for Brett Wisely? Have you been impressed enough with him to think that maybe you want to move on from Estrada? I don't know. But I already mentioned who the most obvious candidates are, and I just think that this series, there's 5 possible outcomes, and Giants need to be in the top 2 of them, probably, in my opinion, 4-0 or 3-1 at the least, to make a case that they should be added to. That doesn't mean that they will add. It doesn't mean that if they do worse than that they will sell. They could just be boring like they have been at pretty much every trade deadline except 2019 and 2021. Otherwise, it's been 2022, 2023, 2020. They were all boring deadlines for the Giants. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, on Monday, the Giants will have played their last game prior to the trade deadline. And so we'll have full analysis of what's to come. And some moves are happening. Significant moves are already happening. So if the Giants lose a couple games to start this series, maybe they pull the trigger and make a move over the weekend, in which case we will have instant reaction for you as soon as possible. Anyway, one more thing. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again on Monday. Have a great weekend. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.